These are definitely not the kinds of stories that amusement rides like to print in their bright brochures. From sudden breakdowns in the middle of movement to moments when people were literally dropped from a height of 100 meters, these events left deep marks that will never disappear. We divided the entire video into levels, and on the very last one you will find the creepiest stories. Try to watch until the end. Enjoy watching. Level 1. The Ninja, Six Flags, Magic Mountain. On the 7th of July 2014, the train Ninja was going along its route among dense trees. These suspended coasters were known for their smoothness. The cars slid under the rail, swaying from side to side. But on that day, nature interfered with the work of the machinery. A large branch fell onto the track. The first car hit it and derailed, hanging at an angle. The train stopped abruptly. 22 passengers were left hanging 40 feet above the ground. The terrain was difficult, and rescuers had to use ladders, lifting equipment, and safety systems. Passengers were brought down one by one. 3 hours of tense work, and all the people were removed. 4 received minor injuries. The coaster was closed in 2015. Astronaut training, Russia. On one Russian amusement ride, 360-degree swings at first worked as usual, a smooth acceleration, children's laughter. But at some point the speed started to increase, and the brakes stopped responding. The swings spun faster and faster, children screamed, and adults were shouting at the operator to stop the ride. But the control system simply did not respond. After long seconds of chaos, the staff decided to intervene radically. They cut the power manually. Only after that did the motion start to slow down. The children were carefully taken down. Fortunately, no one received serious injuries. But the sight was so intense that it was later compared to the overloads of cosmonauts. Monorail Silver Fire, Disney World. On the 25th of June 1985, Monorail Silver arrived at the Epcot station with a blown tire. The wheel was replaced, the train went back into service, and soon the spare tire also burst. Now the metal rim was grinding against the concrete beam, throwing out a shower of sparks. These sparks ignited the remaining rubber, and within seconds, a fire was raging under the car. The monorail was running at height. Inside were passengers cut off from the ground. No emergency exits, no fire detectors, no evacuation plan. 2 people, realizing that the smoke was getting thicker, broke a window, climbed onto the roof, and started helping others out. They were literally pulling people up and then lowering them down onto the track. 7 people were taken to the hospital with smoke inhalation, but no one died. The fire destroyed the last 2 cars, and later Disney completely updated the fire safety system. Magic Carpet Ride, USA. On the 8th of July 2021, at the National Cherry Festival in Michigan, the ride Magic Carpet Ride was going through its usual cycle. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. The platform was being raised in a pendulum motion. People were laughing, cameras were recording. But suddenly, the entire structure began to lean to the side. Not smoothly, as it should, but sharply, dangerously, as if a giant was about to topple over. The operator instantly shut off the power, but the massive machine continued to swing under its own weight. Passengers were screaming. People standing nearby froze, not understanding what was happening. And then something happened that you rarely see at amusement rides. 15 to 20 people who were standing around ran to the base of the ride and began to hold it with their hands, hanging on it with all their weight to stabilize the platform. Their efforts literally saved the people inside. The ride stopped and did not overturn. The restraints had to be opened manually. No one was injured, but by the very next morning the structure was dismantled and sent back to the manufacturer. Level 2. Skyway, Disney World. The 14th of February, 1999 began calmly for the staff of Magic Kingdom. The park had just opened, and the first guests were moving along the alleys. On the Skyway platform, the famous cable car, 65-year-old employee Raymond Barlow was on duty. He was sweeping the area as he had done hundreds of times. But that day, everything went differently. While he was on the platform, other employees, not noticing him, started the morning cycle of the cables. It was a routine work process, no alarm, no warnings. But for Barlow, the cabin that suddenly moved along the cable straight at him became a deadly trap. He tried to grab the door of the approaching cabin as if hoping to pull himself inside, but that was an illusion of salvation. He could not hold on. In the next second, Raymond fell down, first hitting a tree and then landing on a flower bed under the platform. From the impact, he received fatal injuries. The investigation established that the area where Barlow had been working violated federal safety standards. Disney was fined $4,500, and although Skyway was already planned to be closed, the tragedy sped up the decision. In November of that same year, the cable car was shut down forever. Atmosphere, Oaks Amusement Park. On the 14th of June 2023, in Oaks Amusement Park, Portland, the ride Atmosphere stopped at the very moment when it was making a full rotation at the top. The cabin with 25 passengers froze upside down at a height of 100 feet, and it happened so abruptly that for several seconds people did not understand what was going on. The emergency system triggered, and the pendulum stopped. But the position in which it froze was one of the most unpleasant imaginable. Head down, body pressed into the restraint, blood rushing to the face. People shouted to the operator. Some began to choke with fear. But the main problem was that the staff could not simply walk up and unbuckle everyone. Any interference could have been dangerous. Engineers had to restart the system manually without upsetting the balance of the heavy structure. Half an hour of waiting felt like an eternity. When the pendulum finally began to slowly rotate downward, everyone literally froze. Not a single extra movement, only a careful transition into a normal position. On the ground, people were met by medics. No one received severe physical injuries, but the experienced stress was enormous. The ride was closed for almost a year, and even after it reopened, the 360-degree rotation remained blocked. The Voyage, Holiday World. On the 4th of June 2021, in Holiday World, Indiana, Dawn Jankovic and her son Gunnar chose a day of rest that was supposed to be a regular family adventure. They went to ride the Voyage, one of the longest wooden coasters in the world. The ride lasted 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The train picked up speed, took turns, and nothing foreshadowed trouble. No jerks, no sounds of malfunction. But when the train returned to the station, Gunnar realized that his mother was not responding. The operators called medics, who immediately began to administer aid, but Dawn was unconscious. She was taken to Memorial Hospital in Jasper, where a few hours later she died. The autopsy results shocked everyone. Dawn suffered a rupture of the right internal thoracic artery due to the G-forces that her body could not withstand. The coaster was working properly. This was a tragic, but technically unavoidable case. The Voyage was closed only for 1 day for inspection, after which it was returned to operation. Monorail Purple, Disney World. The 5th of July, 2009, 2 o'clock at night. The parks were closed, but the monorail system was still transporting the last guests to the hotels. On the line were Monorail Pink and Monorail Purple. Pink was about to go into the service tunnel. To do this, the switch had to be changed, but the operator made a mistake. Instead of sending Pink onto the reserve line, the system sent Purple directly onto Pink. Monorails move fast, and the pilot's cabin is located at the front, where the field of view is limited. The pilot of Purple, 21-year-old Austin Wenenberg, saw Pink only when the distance was already being measured in meters. He hit the emergency brake, but for a heavy train, this was not enough. A head-on collision occurred. The cabin of Purple was crushed. Austin died on the spot. Several passengers received minor injuries. The monorail system was shut down, operators were sent for retraining, and later automatic locks were implemented that physically exclude a routing error. The trains, pink and purple, were written off. From their surviving parts, a new train was assembled, monorail teal. Flying chair, Ningbo, China, January 2023. In the picturesque Lingyanshan area, where mountain slopes disappear into the mist and tourists come for panoramic views, there is an extreme mountain swing that swings passengers over the edge of a cliff. These swings are not a ride from a city park. They are installed at great height, and when the seat gathers momentum, the ground beneath you literally disappears into an abyss. One tourist sat down in the metal seat, ready to receive his dose of adrenaline, and the first few swings were normal. Loud breaths, excitement, laughter of onlookers. But then there was a sharp movement, and part of the traction cable suddenly tore off, dangling freely behind the back of the seat. Screams erupted from the crowd. The man himself felt the seat jerk and instinctively gripped the side handrails. The swings continued to accelerate. The huge pendulum went upward and then dropped sharply down, and each new cycle became more and more dangerous. On one of the downward swings, the tourist's leg hit a steel support. The smack of metal on metal sounded so loudly that people standing below flinched. Then, on the backward swing, a second hit followed. It was clear that the man was holding on by sheer willpower. If his palms had slipped even for a second, the result would have been catastrophic. The operators manually stopped the machine when they managed to dampen the arc of the swing a little. The man was taken down. He could barely step on his leg. Later, it turned out that the bone was indeed broken. The ride was closed and dismantled for inspection, and the tourist was sent for surgery. He survived, but will probably never again sit on such swings. Level 3, Superstar, University of Chester Fair, July 2024, the annual University of Chester Fair. Noise, music, crowds, the ride Superstar against the backdrop of the sunset sky. It spins a huge platform, lifting people to a great height and then lowering them back down, creating that very mix of delight and fear for which people come here. When the cabin picked up speed, people screamed, but these were the usual screams of joy. However, a few seconds later, the screams turned into real panic. One of the outer panels, a decorative element of the body, suddenly came loose, and it flew off as if someone had fired it from a catapult. The panel swept over the heads of the spectators and struck a group of people standing nearby. Fragments of glass and plastic flew in all directions. 19-year-old student Caitlin Clow fell to the ground. A shard knocked her off balance, another hit her face. People around immediately rushed to her. The ride began to slow down, but stopping from full speed is not instantaneous. When the mechanics fully extinguished the rotation, the locking systems did not open automatically. People had to be taken out manually, one by one, under the supervision of the staff. Caitlin was taken to the hospital with a concussion, accommodative visual disturbances, a whiplash neck injury, and severe dizziness. Fortunately, no serious long-term consequences were found. Superstar was immediately closed and dismantled. Ferris wheel fall, Greensboro, North Carolina. At the Central Carolina Fair in Greensboro in 2017, the Ferris wheel was rotating slowly and calmly. The gondolas swayed in the wind, a typical picture of an evening fair. But one of the cars suddenly began to shift dangerously outward, as if tearing out of its axle. The locking mechanism, the one that should keep the cabin level, failed. Two boys inside felt the seat tilting and began to slide toward the open edge. The safety belts were not designed for lateral G-forces. They simply could not hold the children when the cabin was leaning to the side. At that moment, one of the fair employees, Albert Irvin, climbed onto the structure, trying manually to straighten the cabin by holding it with his hands. It was a heroic act, but the system failed at the very second when he was higher than everyone else. The cabin jerked back to its original position, and Albert fell. On the way down, he hit several cars and crashed onto the ground. He was miraculously saved, only a broken finger and several cuts. The boys were removed alive and without severe injuries. The inspection concluded that the Ferris wheel was safe. The very next day, it was operating again. This incident still causes heated debate. Green Mountain Park, Taif, Saudi Arabia. On the 31st of July 2025, Green Mountain Park in the city of Taif. The tallest ride in the park, the huge big pendulum. Dozens of guests sit strapped in with shoulder restraints while the gondola describes giant circles. Everything looked routine: screams, lights, music, the night atmosphere of a resort city. But on one of the pendulum's sweeps, something happened that was recorded by dozens of cameras. The main supporting column that held the entire structure broke almost in half. A deafening metallic crack sounded. The gondola fell. Part of the structure crashed down, striking both passengers and metal barriers. Chaos erupted on the platform. People ran, screams and shrieks echoed. The sound of shattering metal rang out. In the end, 23 people were injured. 3 were in critical condition. But incredibly, no one died. Medics declared a code yellow, a mass arrival of victims. The park was closed, and the government of Taif ordered a large-scale technical investigation to begin. Level 4. Oceanana Water World, Luxembourg. Oceanana was supposed to become the pride of a new tourism project in Luxembourg. A modern water park, a large dome, water slides, lights, construction almost completed, and the opening was planned in just a few weeks. But on the morning of the 12th of February 2024, workers were testing the fire alarm and switched it into test mode, after which they forgot to switch it back. A few hours later, under one of the water attractions, a welded joint began to smolder. The pipe was connected using electrofusion, but the joint was made with a mistake. It overheated and then began to char. The first smell of burning did not alert anyone. There were too many building materials and dust, but soon black smoke filled the space. And since the alarm was turned off, people did not even realize what was happening. The fire spread with enormous speed. There was a lot of plastic, wood, and insulation inside. Flames shot up to the ceiling and spread across the entire dome. Workers escaped outside however they could, and the developer, site manager Patrick Gilholm, remained inside, checking one of the upper levels. Communication with him was lost. Firefighters tried to enter the building, but the thick smoke made it impossible. Only the next day, when the fire was finally contained, Patrick was found dead. The water park was completely destroyed. A project worth 110 million euros is being rebuilt from scratch. Ladybug, Adventureland, the 30th of August, 2005. Adventureland was preparing to close, that hour when the crowd thins, the music fades, and the rides make their last cycles. The children's coaster Ladybug was empty. Only one person was nearby, 18-year-old operator Stephen Gary. He had been working at the ride for several months, knew every button and every lever. But that evening, he ended up on the tracks. Either he fell or he was trying to fix something. And at that very moment, the train, which was standing nearby, suddenly moved. The first car struck Stephen. The remaining cars rolled forward and stopped directly over his body. A woman passing by screamed, and within seconds, park staff were removing the cars using winches. Stephen was conscious. He said that everything was fine, that he hardly felt any pain. He even tried to calm his mother when they allowed her into the waiting room. But a few hours later, his condition sharply worsened. The injuries turned out to be too severe, and Stephen died. It was the first death in Adventureland in all 43 years of its existence. Top scan, Adventureland. The next day, morning. Adventureland opened as if nothing had happened. No one could imagine that 24 hours later, a second tragedy would occur. So severe that summer, the park would be called cursed. 45-year-old Barbara Brady came with a group of 24 people and 5 caregivers. She was a person with mental disabilities, quiet, calm, trusting. They waited their turn at Top Scan, a ride that rotates people in all planes, creating a sense of complete loss of orientation. When Barbara sat in the seat, her caregiver helped her strap in. But seconds after the launch, the impossible happened. Her safety restraint came undone. Barbara flew out, soared over the high fence, and fell onto the roof of a car in the parking lot. She was taken to the hospital, but her injuries were incompatible with life. The inspection showed the mechanism had not been maintained properly. It was the fault of the staff, not an accident. The park acknowledged responsibility. 2 tragedies in 48 hours. Adventureland lost its reputation as a safe place for many years. Kylie, the white roller coaster, the 9th of June, 1989. Lagoon Amusement Park, Utah. 13-year-old Kylie King came with friends to spend the day on the rides. They were riding the classic wooden coaster white roller coaster, which Kylie had known and loved since childhood. On the drops, she usually lifted herself slightly, raising her hands and catching the airflow. It looked harmless. Kids do this on coasters all over the world. But the mechanisms of such old rides are designed for a person sitting firmly. The lap bar is supposed to press the body down from above. But Kylie was petite, too small for the bar to fully secure her. On the second drop, at the moment when the car lunged sharply downward, her body continued moving upward. She literally flew out of the seat and fell from a height of about 35 feet. Death was instantaneous. The investigation concluded that the ride was in working order, but the design did not account for the small size of some teenagers. It was a tragic accident that could not be prevented within the framework of the old mechanism. The Lightning Loops, Six Flags, Great Adventure, June 1987. At Six Flags, Great Adventure, a group of young people decided to ride lightning loops, 2 mirrored looping coasters that launch the train with a single impulse and then send it into a sharp vertical loop. Karen Brown, one of the group, sat down in the seat, but her shoulder restraint did not latch. She tried to close it again and again, but the mechanism would not engage. Her boyfriend began shouting at the operator, begging him to stop the train. But in the noise of the ride, his shouts were either mistaken for excitement or simply not heard. The train moved, and before the train entered the first loop, Karen flew out. A fall from a height of 75 feet left no chance of survival. The investigation concluded that the ride was completely functional. The problem was human error. The operator did not make sure that all restraints were closed. The park received the maximum fine of that time, $1,000, and strengthened its safety rules. Level 5, Flying Chairs, Hunan, China, February 2021. In a small amusement park in Shaoyang County, Hunan Province, people were standing in line for a familiar ride. Flying chairs. It is one of the oldest and most popular carousel mechanisms. Chains, seats, a platform that spins guests around an axis. Childlike joy, music, wind in the face. But that day, everything went differently. When the platform rose and began to accelerate, people in the chairs were happily swinging. But a few seconds later, a sound was heard that cannot be mistaken for anything else. A dull metallic pop, followed by grinding. The central support, the shaft holding the entire structure, began to break apart. In videos that later spread on social networks, you can see how the huge upper beam first tilts and then the entire carousel literally collapses downward, crumpling under its own weight. People sitting in the chairs hit the ground together with the collapsing structure. Screams, panic, chaos. 16 people were injured, 3 were in serious condition. But incredibly, no one died. The investigation established that the human factor did not play a role. The cause was metal fatigue and violations in maintenance. In other words, the structure had been operated for too long without repair. The park was closed for an indefinite period, the operators were questioned, and the equipment was confiscated. Slingshot. Luna Park, France, August 2015. Luna Park, that very French park famous for its atmosphere of endless celebration. Among many bright rides, Slingshot stands out especially. A catapult that launches a capsule with people dozens of meters into the air using two tensioned cables. You strap yourself into a small spherical capsule, the tension increases, the motors roar, and then launch. But on that day, the launch became a catastrophe. The capsule had just started to rise when one of the steel cables snapped. When it broke, it did not simply fall to the ground. It lashed like a giant string, and at the same time the capsule lost its balance. Now it was hanging on only one cable, and this cable instantly became its axis of rotation. The capsule slammed into the metal tower, bounced away, struck again, and inside sat two people who did not know whether they would survive. The operator could not simply lower the capsule. The structure was warped and jammed. French rescuers brought a crane, secured the capsule with safety straps, and only after that did they begin to extract the passengers. After an hour of work, both people were brought down. The 24-year-old woman had a broken leg. The second person had bruises and contusions. Slingshot was completely dismantled. Level 6, Adrenaline, Twister, Luna Park, France. On the 5th of August 2023, another incident in Luna Park, but this time a tragic one. The ride Adrenaline, known as Twister in English-speaking countries, lifts people to a height of more than 180 feet and then releases them into free fall on a long suspended pendulum. Everything looks spectacular, but it is worked out to an automatic pattern. First the ascent, a pause, a moment of silence, and a sharp plunge downward. But that day, nature interfered with this algorithm. When two young people, a 17-year-old boy and a 19-year-old girl, were at the top point, a sudden strong gust of wind swept along the coast. It was so strong that in the footage you can see the cabin visibly shudder. And at that moment, the restraint on one of the seats came undone. The boy was thrown out. He struck his head on a metal beam and fell from a great height. The injuries were immediately fatal. The girl sitting next to him was also ejected, but she fell differently, and medics were able to stabilize her. She survived, although she suffered extremely severe injuries. The police launched an investigation under the article "Involuntary Manslaughter and Injury." The park manager was detained. Later, he offered to pay for the funeral for the family and ordered the ride to be completely dismantled. Drop Tower, Punjab, India. The noise of the fair in Mohali, Punjab, a continuous stream of music, horns, voices. Among dozens of attractions, one stood out in particular, the tall, brightly lit drop tower, a tower that lifts passengers to the top and then releases them into free fall. In the evening, when about 50 people had gathered on the platform, the ride rose to its usual height. From above, the city looked like an endless scattering of lights. People were laughing, some were filming, someone was clutching the handrails nervously. And suddenly, instead of the usual smooth braking, the tower broke loose and dropped. The cabin fell almost the entire height at full speed, as if the very soul had been torn out of its mechanisms. The impact was so strong that the glass barriers around the ride shattered, scattering shards all over the area. Several passengers hit their faces on metal bars, others were thrown up off their seats, receiving sharp compression injuries to the spine. Panic flared instantly. Someone was screaming for help, someone was trying to climb out through the fences, and the operators, instead of helping, ran away from the area, fearing the crowd's retaliation. At least 16 people were injured, several critically. Later, the police detained the organizers of the fair. The cause of the accident turned out to be simple and terrifying: a complete failure of the braking system. Drop Tower was shut down on the spot, and the fairground was sealed off. For a long time, the smell of overheated metal hung in the air, and people walked away from the site not believing that only a few seconds earlier they had been standing right under that tower. Level 7, Hammer Ride, Paraguay, 2022. Expo Regina de Caaguazú, a fair that families visit together. Among the rides is a classic kamikaze, two huge horizontal cabins rotating around a common axis. In one of the cabins sits a schoolgirl. Calm, strapped in, nothing foreshadows trouble. But the operator, mistakenly pressing the wrong button, changes the configuration of the seat restraints. And suddenly, the belt unfastens. The cabin rises upside down, and the girl ends up hanging over the ground at a height of about 65 feet. Her legs dangle in the air. She is holding on with the last of her strength. Other passengers try to hold her, grabbing her clothes. From the crowd come shouts, "Stop it! Get her down!" The operator finally blocks the movement. The cabin is leveled, and people are brought down to the ground one by one. The girl suffered injuries to her fingers, but she is alive, thanks to the people who were beside her. Terminal Velocity, Wisconsin Dells, USA. This ride was unlike anything else. Terminal Velocity, not a seat, not a carousel, but a real free vertical dive. You stand on a platform face down, you are strapped into a special vest, and then they drop you in free fall from a great height straight onto a net stretched over massive cushions. Many people came to the park just for this. Among them was 12-year-old Tegan Marty, the 30th of July, 2010. A queue, waiting, a slight nervous excitement, and at last, her turn. The operator, Charles Carnell, gave her instructions, checked the straps, prepared her for the fall, but he did not notice the most important thing. The safety system below was not ready. The air cushions were not inflated. The net was not stretched. The mechanics were empty, as if the ride had been turned off for the night. When Charles pressed the release button, Tegan dropped, and nothing softened her fall. She hit her back, lost consciousness. Blood poured from her ears and nose. Her father and one of the visitors rushed to her, started performing chest compressions until the ambulance arrived. Tegan was taken to a children's hospital in critical condition. She had spinal fractures, a shattered pelvis, damage to internal organs, massive brain swelling. And yet, miraculously, her brain was not destroyed. She spent a month in the hospital, then a month in intensive care in Miami, where she learned again how to walk, to speak, to hold her balance. The operator was punished. He was charged with second-degree bodily harm. He paid a fine, only $268, and Tegan, 2 years later, returned to the very hospital where she had been brought barely alive, and entered it on her own 2 feet. These stories are not just a chronicle of accidents. They are a reminder that behind the bright lights and cheerful music, there are extremely complex mechanisms, and each one of them is a potential source of danger. Sometimes the machinery is at fault. Sometimes it is human error. Sometimes it is chance, a gust of wind, or an old bolt that no one replaced. But every time there are people who rescue, help, hold someone's hand, or simply make the right decision at the right moment. And those who have gone through something like this carry with them a story that is impossible to forget.